As America mourns the victims of yet another seemingly indiscriminate shooting spree, we ask how many more people have to die before the nation's politicians even consider introducing strict gun control laws. You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidoo. Not again. That was the cry of many Americans when they turned on their morning news on Friday. At least 12 people were killed and dozens wounded when a man wearing a gas mask and body armor opened fire and tossed a tear gas canister into a cinema auditorium in the town of Aurora in Colorado. People were watching a midnight showing of the latest Batman movie, Dark Knight Rises. A 24-year-old former student named James Holmes was arrested shortly after. Police officers recovered 4 guns, including a rifle, a shotgun and 2 Glock handguns. This latest shooting took place just 30 kilometers away from Columbine High School, where in 1999, 13 people were shot dead by 2 students. For many Americans, the right to bear arms is regarded as an essential freedom protected by the Second Amendment of the Constitution. Politicians have been reluctant even to call for tougher gun control laws. But in a country where nearly 9,000 were murdered with guns in 2010, could that be about to change? Here's what some of the witnesses of the Aurora shooting had to say.
Well, I saw a man walk through the exit. He walked in through the exit door with wearing all black. It looked like he had a gas mask on,
a bulletproof vest,
and he threw one tear gas thing.
And landed in the road, like right in front of us. Hit the girl right in front of us. Then it exploded.
Then he threw another one.
Yeah.
He shot the ceiling, just straight up in the ceiling, and then everybody knew it was real at that point, and they just started, it was just straight chaos, you know, everybody was starting to scream and run, and at that point he went straight from here to here with a gun in my face at that point. That rifle was in my face. After that, he was shooting people behind me, and I had like gun shells just, you know, falling on my head, burning my forehead. All I smelled was powder. He was just shooting at random people that were trying to run away. If they got up out of the aisle, if they dove or anything, he was just shooting. He didn't have an agenda. It was just anybody that was in his way, he was just going to shoot. And, you know, I honestly can't tell you a time frame, but it felt like forever. And it was probably like 10, 15 minutes in reality, you know, but it was the most insane thing I've ever seen. There were little kids in there getting shot, you know, like 6-year-old kids, babies even.
President Obama appeared at a campaign stop in Florida but told the crowd he wanted to forego politics because of the shooting.
I'm sure that many of you who are parents here had the same reaction that I did when I heard this news. My daughters go to the movies. What if Malia and Sasha had been at the theater, as so many of our kids do every day? Michelle and I will be fortunate enough to hug our girls a little tighter tonight, and I'm sure you will do the same with your children. But for those parents who may not be so lucky, we have to embrace them and let them know we will be there for them as a nation.
So does the United States need tough gun control laws? I'm joined in the studio by Colin Goddard. He survived the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007 and works for the Brady Campaign to prevent gun violence. Also in the studio is Hubert Williams, president of the Police Federation, who also chairs the National Law Enforcement Partnership to Prevent Gun Violence. And from Seattle, we're joined by Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation, who argues for the rights of Americans to bear arms. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We have another shooting tragedy in the United States, and yet again, right after the tragedy, we hear these calls for gun control. One of the public figures, high-profile public figures, that's become a champion of gun control is the New York Mayor, Michael Bloomberg. He spoke shortly after this tragedy, and this is what he had to say. Let's listen.
Soothing words are nice, but maybe it's time that the 2 people who want to be president of the United States stand up and tell us what they're going to do about it. Because this is obviously a problem across the country. And everybody always says, isn't it tragic? And, you know, we look for, was the guy, as you said, maybe trying to recreate Batman. I mean, there's so many murders with guns every day. It's just got to stop. And instead of the 2 people, President Obama and Governor Romney, talking in broad things about they want to make the world a better place, okay, Tell us how. And this is a real problem.
New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg talking there. Hubert Williams, the question is, will anything be done, or will this be drowned out again in all the noise that we hear after these kinds of tragedies, and we will be back to business as usual in just a short space of time?
The problem is not that things haven't been done, but there's always a pushback. There's always undercutting. The 1994 Crime Control Bill had a provision, a ban on assault rifles. Police officers from all over the United States came to Washington, D.C. to fight for that legislation. They put a sunset provision in the legislation, the Congress, that caused the ban to die in 10 years. So in 2004, the ban on assault weapons died. This gentleman that purchased that gun and killed those people had legal guns. Could he have gotten that gun if the ban was on? He would not have gotten it legally. Machine guns were banned. We need to put a stop to war-type weapons being used in American streets and cities. There's no justification or basis for that. And there's nothing more superior than human life. And that's what's at jeopardy in this situation.
Okay, let's go to Alan. Alan, does there need to be restrictions on gun ownership right now on things like the ownership of assault weapons?
No, I don't think so at all, because it isn't a weapon. A gun doesn't have a brain to hate with or a finger to pull its own trigger. So the problem isn't the tool or the gun. You know, all these people that want gun control or gun bans don't talk about the number of times firearms are used successfully by people to protect themselves, their family, and their property from criminal attack. Anywhere in the United States, depending on which survey you want to look at, between 800,000 times and 2 million times a year, somebody uses a firearm successfully to protect themselves. So you have to look at both sides of the equation to be able to come out with a real good public policy answer. And the other side refuses to look at the other side of the equation.
Okay. Colin, I want to ask you to respond to what Alan has been saying over there. But first, I want to hear your story. I mean, it's a remarkable story. You survived those shootings in 2007 at Virginia Tech, which was in Blacksburg.
Right, very similar to the people in Colorado who were sitting to watch a film. I was sitting in a French class one Monday morning when, in the middle of conjugating French verbs, I heard gunfire. And what was a very normal situation for me turned into the craziest day of my life. And I was nearly killed. There were 17 people in that room. I'm one of 7 people who are still alive. I have 3 bullets in me for the rest of my life. But I've luckily survived. But I think the biggest change that I realized was that, you know, I didn't know anything about gun laws. I assumed that, you know, you had to have training before you bought one. I assumed you had to have a license to get one, or you registered it. You know, thorough background check, of course. And, you know, nearly losing my life made me realize that we actually don't even do a background check on people before they buy a gun in this country on all gun sales. That's insane. You know, I think the big problem on this issue in the inaction is the fact that American people don't know what our laws are. They think that we already have good gun laws. So when you poll the American people and say, do you want more gun control in a very vague term, right, you get a very low level of support. But when you break it down to specifics, when you say, do you want a background check done on every gun sale, you get 80 and 90% of people, even gun owners, support this idea, because it makes sense. It's not talking about removing everyone's gun. It's talking about doing a check to make sure that dangerous people can't get their hands on them so easily. It's insane how we allow this.
Yeah, much of this is, of course, enshrined in the Second Amendment to the Constitution on the right to possess weapons. It says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Hubert, I just want to get to something that Alan said earlier on. Guns don't shoot people, people shoot people.
Well, it takes both. But let me say this. In 2011, last year, first time in 14 years that more police officers were killed with guns than died in automobile accidents. If you think about this, being in that theater, when this guy came in, threw some kind of a smoke bomb, and then let loose with a military assault weapon, killing all these people, that was like a domestic terrorist attack. Right. It's very similar to what the people must have experienced in 9/11. Mm-hmm. 30,000 people die every year from guns. That makes, over the last 10 years, 300,000 people. Police officers are dying, citizens are dying. It's time for us to stand up and say, enough is enough, that life comes first. Police officers are not opposed to people buying guns. They have guns. Hunters should have guns if they want to. But these assault weapons should not exist on American streets.
Okay. Alan, when you hear those figures coming from Hubert Williams, yeah, you know, the fact that 30,000 people die, including a number of policemen, surely there is a need for some kind of control, some kind of legislation.
Yeah. First of all, the majority of those deaths happen to be suicides to begin with, and there's no reason to believe that they didn't use a gun to commit suicide. They wouldn't find another device to commit suicide with. But he also ignores the fact that the shooter in this particular case, this deranged individual, also had with him a rifle and 2 regular handguns. So again, it doesn't matter what kind of gun he had, and my guess is the shotgun may have actually done more damage than anything else in this particular case, but it isn't really the weapon, it's the person. I mean, and this is a person, by the way, that, you know, Colin talked about background checks. Well, this person probably would have been able to pass a background check, not having a criminal record before. So registration, background checks don't do anything when you have a deranged individual, a crazy person, a terrorist, somebody aimed at mass murder. But what they're not talking about is the fact that this movie theater chain had a policy of no guns allowed. And previously, people who came with legitimate concealed carry permits to carry a firearm to protect themselves and maybe others in the movie theater were denied entrance and escorted out. So the problem is it became a victim disarmament zone as well. There was nobody in the theater who could protect themselves or anybody else from a mass murderer. That's wrong, because it is about saving lives. And both the other two guests don't want to admit that guns are also used for good, legitimate purposes. In fact, if they weren't, police wouldn't carry them.
Well, I don't want to debate the gentleman, but he should at least get his facts right. Mm-hmm. The Brady bill did stipulate that any guns purchased from a licensed federal dealer, background checks had to be conducted. People that have criminal records and are mentally deranged could not buy weapons in this country. 40% of the weapons purchased in this country go outside of federal licensed dealers. Would you be in favor of a background check for all purchases of weapons in this country? Because you say it's not the gun, it's the individual.
I have no problems with background checks. What I have problems with are when you set up, the devil's always in the details. When you set up a law of background checks done in a way that the federal system can't possibly physically do them, and so places like gun shows on a weekend, when somebody tried to buy a firearm, the checks wouldn't work because the system is overcrowded and overflowed, and the gun show ends, and then a person can't buy the gun. If you would come up with something reasonable, there's workable ways of doing it. The problem is the anti-gun lobby in this country really doesn't want reasonable restrictions. They really want bans. Like you just said earlier on, you'd like to ban certain types of firearms that are in commonly owned usage by people in the United States. That's where we part company.
Well, let's talk about reasonable restrictions. If you cannot get a background check when you buy a gun, say, at a gun show or perhaps on the internet, should guns be sold at gun shows and on the internet?
Well, let me jump in on that for a second. Yeah. If you buy a gun on the internet, the gun still has to legally go through a licensed dealer and a background check is done. You can't legally buy a gun on the internet any other way. If you do, you're breaking the law right now.
What about gun shows?
Gun shows, only licensed dealers at gun shows right now have to conduct a background check.
Not true.
That's true. A licensed dealer at a gun show has to. No one else does. Only licensed dealers do it at a gun show.
It's not just licensed dealers that are at those gun shows. They sell guns from the back of their cars without any license to anybody that wants them.
Hey, I've been to a million gun shows. I've never seen anybody sell a gun out of the back of a car. You can do that in any alley in the city in New York City if you wanted to do it. It doesn't have to be at a gun show.
I just came out of Wisconsin.
The bottom line is that's not legal.
With the police chiefs in Wisconsin. Throughout the state, there's 600 police chiefs, more than 600 police chiefs, and they all say that this happens at gun shows. 3 weeks ago, I was in Virginia. They say the same thing.
Then why don't they go to the gun show?
But they haven't been to a million gun shows like you, so they don't have the experience.
Okay, Colin, let me bring you in here. You know, when we hear these calls for restrictions on gun ownership, for some kind of legislation to be introduced, what seems to be happening right now in the country is that it's going in the opposite direction. I mean, we hear of dozens of municipalities, local authorities, county authorities, passing hundreds of laws and rules whereby it makes it easier to own guns. And in many instances, you know, you don't have to obtain a permit if you conceal those weapons.
All right, well, let me tell you a story. One of the gentlemen who sold a gun to the man who shot me and killed 32 people at my school was actually invited to come and speak at my school a year later from a student group who wanted to be allowed to carry guns on college campuses. And his message to the college students was, you know, you never know who might have a gun out there. So you too should have a gun to protect yourself. And then he actually gave a discount to college students to buy guns from his online store. So his message is, you never know who might be buying guns from me, so you should buy a gun from me too to protect yourself. I mean, that is genius marketing if you want to sell more weapons. That is horrible public policy to stop innocent people from getting shot. You know, we need to have a conversation. It absolutely matters what is in the person's hand when he walks into a movie theater. I would have much rather had a person walk into my classroom with a knife in their hand rather than a 9mm. It absolutely makes a difference. When all you got to do is pull a trigger and squeeze your finger and you can kill someone, I mean, that is something that needs to be treated with the utmost respect, with the utmost scrutiny, and with the utmost regulation to make sure it's not going into the hands of someone who would do harm with it. And we are far from that.
Right. Hubert, you mentioned earlier on the assault weapons ban, and that expired in 2004. Why was it not extended?
Congress wouldn't extend it. There are powerful gun interests in this country that override public considerations or concerns. And you're absolutely right when you say that the public is in favor of background checks. We know that background checks work because between 1994 and 2009, background checks prevented 1,925,000 people that were banned under the 1964 prescription for who can't buy a weapon, mentally deranged criminals, etc. They were banned. They were prevented from getting weapons. Almost 2 million people. So we know background checks work. That's why law enforcement leaders from throughout the nation are fighting to get background checks for all weapons purchased, whether it's a federal deal or not.
And Alan, we know that a number of guns are sold without background checks. So should the penalties be heavier for people who sell guns without conducting the necessary background check?
If they sell it to a disqualified person, yes, I think it should be. But these numbers just given out aren't exactly accurate. And first of all, a lot of the number of people who were denied were then approved subsequently later on because they mixed up with other people's names in the database, names that are similarly spelled alike. Especially if you're Hispanic, you have problems sometimes because there's a lot of Hispanic names that are all similar. A lot of people were disqualified for reasons that shouldn't have been disqualified, and then later and bought them. And then people who should have been disqualified, you have no way of knowing if they went and got a gun somewhere else illegally. So when he says background checks work, they might work, but they don't work against people like crazy people or people bent on creating mayhem with any kind of a weapon. And in the case we're talking about here, just happened in Colorado, we don't know. This person may have gone through a background check. We don't even know yet.
The statistics are from the United States Justice Department. So if you have some question about their validity, you should check with them.
Okay, Colin.
Well, we checked with them, and in fact, they've admitted that those were the first preliminary numbers. They didn't include the people that went back through the system the second time and found those were errors in their database.
If there are errors in database, then what we need to do is straighten out the state system for collecting information from people purchasing firearms. Would you be in favor of that?
Well, oh, yes, most definitely. I'd also be in favor of correcting the errors that are in the database that are in there now. You know, it's like the no-fly list. You have an awful lot of people in the no-fly list that aren't terrorists, but they're blocked from flying because of errors in the database. I'm all for correcting those errors, and I think it's important if you're going to have a database and take people's fundamental constitutional rights away from them, that the database be accurate and correct. It only makes sense.
Well, listen, I represent the 10 leading law enforcement organizations in the nation that want to see gun violence reduced. Would you be willing to write a letter to the Attorney General saying what you just said on television?
Correcting databases? Most definitely. In fact, we've advocated that. But to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not worried about just gun violence. I'm worried about all kinds of violence. The reason why I own a firearm is because I don't want to be attacked by somebody not only with a gun, but I don't care if they have a knife or a baseball bat. The bottom line is, why do police carry firearms? Because it's a very good self-defense tool, isn't it?
No, we know what you want. You want to go back to the Wild West.
Okay, well, let's take a look.
No, come on.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the facts about gun ownership in the United States. The U.S. gun industry is estimated to be worth more than $60 billion a year. There are roughly 300 million firearms owned by civilians in a country which has a population of 311 million. There are at least 88 guns per 100 residents in the U.S., making it first in the world in gun ownership per capita. By contrast, Serbia, which is second on the list, has 58 guns per 100 people. 2/3 of all murders in the United States are committed with firearms. In 2010, that amounted to 8,775 out of nearly 1,300 murders. Colin, when we look at some of the gun laws in Colorado, the state where this tragedy took place, I mean, if the suspect, James Holmes, bought the guns in the state, he didn't have to register them. In Colorado, you don't need to register them. The state prohibits registration. I mean, there's some other things as well. He can keep the guns at home. No permit is needed until he takes them into public. No limits on how many weapons can be bought in a month. No waiting period for background checks. And this has all happened since Columbine, when 13 people were killed.
Yeah, we are far from having any sort of registration system or permitting of gun owners. You know, we're just working for making sure a background check is done. You know, when you say registration to people like Alan Gottlieb, it's the 9th level of hell, and they get very afraid that ultimately that will lead to the ultimate confiscation of everyone's firearm by the U.S. government, which I think is a very paranoid idea. You know, what you're saying and what he said before, you know, we have, you know, just about a gun for every person in this country. And to what Alan said, you know, that if only there was somebody there with a gun themselves, they could have stopped this. So, you know, if we only had more guns in more places of our country, people would become safer. You know, for the United States of America, the country with just as many guns as people, if that were true, we would already be the safest country in the world. And we are far from that. In fact, we lead modern industrialized countries with the number of people shot and killed every year. So there is something that the United States is particularly not doing when it comes to gun ownership or reasonable regulations that other countries are doing, and they see an astronomically lower level of people shot and killed every year and committing suicide.
Hubert, are there laws in place that would prevent people with mental issues or deranged people from getting guns?
Well, there are laws in place. The Brady Bill, for example, says that people that are mentally deranged cannot legally purchase a gun from a federally licensed dealers. Now, Alan Gottlieb's point is he's not he doesn't unfavorably view the background checks, and that he would be in favor of improving the system by which data is incorporated in these, so you don't have the problems that he's talking about. And the only thing that the law enforcement community is saying, the same rules that currently exist under federal law for licensed dealers should be extended to anyone that purchases a gun from anywhere, and that would include people that are mentally deranged.
Right. Alan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to respond. It isn't the Brady Act, first of all, that has that provision in it. It's the 1968 Gun Control Act that has that provision in it. The Brady Bill only extended a waiting period, which went away, and a background check, which stayed. But the prohibition on people with mental problems from owning firearms is really in the 1968 Gun Control Act. So I wish he'd get his information exactly accurate so it'll put false information out. But with regard to the background checks, the problem is, in this case, again, we don't even know if the person went through a background check. He very well may have. And registration doesn't stop anybody from committing a crime with a gun, and isn't really a very good tool. It's an after-the-fact kind of thing anyway, and it doesn't really work much for law enforcement. It's a waste of resources and money when you could be having police officers paid for with that money out on the streets, defending us, having more protection for us, and then maybe less people would buy firearms if they had more police protection. Unfortunately, police can't be every place at all times. A good example is they weren't in the movie theater to protect the people at that time. And again, the movie theater being a gun-free zone, not allowing anybody to have a firearm in the theater who is licensed to carry in Colorado to protect themselves, it's like asking for trouble. It doesn't make sense. It's not good public policy.
So it doesn't make any difference what the police in America feel about these guns,
well,
about the danger.
If I can, you're saying...
One moment, Alan.
You're saying police in America?
Yeah.
1 second. You're saying police in America. There are an awful lot of surveys done of police officers. The rank-and-file police officers and sheriffs in this country support people having firearms pretty heavily. It's really more the police unions and police chiefs who are political creatures of big city mayors, like Mayor Bloomberg, who are appointed to serve the mayor's women's wishes that oppose gun ownership.
All right, Alan, let me give Hubert a chance to respond here. Go ahead.
Well, you know, it's difficult really to argue with somebody that constantly looks in a very narrow spectrum and does not even consider what happened there in that theater. Nobody with a gun could have probably stopped that, might have killed other people. And in this country, we need to put life first, and we need to have reasonable measures that will protect citizens and not deprive people of their fundamental rights. Now, Alan, I know you're talking a good game, but I would like to see you stand behind those words. You want to work with...
I stand behind those words every day because I care about life. It's why I own a firearm and why I'm licensed to carry one.
Okay,
I want to protect myself and my family.
One moment. We're running out of time here. I just want to get to Colin. Colin, you know, you've been through this horrific tragedy at Virginia Tech, and you're working very hard to get controls placed on gun ownership in this country. Are you still hopeful? Are you still optimistic that there will be some kind of, you know, regulation, some kind of rules or laws that will be brought in that will prevent something like this happening again?
I wouldn't be here with you today if I wasn't hopeful. But, you know, I have been discouraged after mass shootings in this country, constant, repeated mass shootings, when our elected leaders and our congressmen say, you know, now's not the time to talk about this issue. Now's not the time to talk about solutions. You know, if now's not the time when 71 people just got shot, when is the time? You know, we lose 32 people to gun violence every single day in this country. Which day would it be appropriate for you to talk about this? Change will happen not from our elected officials, but from the American people. When they become outraged, they hold their elected leaders accountable for doing the bidding of the gun lobby who profit from selling more guns, and hold their elected leaders accountable and make sure that they're doing things in the interest of public safety. If they want to, go to our website, bradycampaign.org, sign a petition to hold your elected leaders accountable.
That's where we're going to have to leave it. We've run out of time. Colin, Hubert, Alan, thanks to all of you for joining us.
Thank you.
And that is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us.